Hey, welcome to the last module. So this one, importing and exporting data. There's a variety of options. There's a few new terms that show up, ETL. Hey, we all need another three-letter acronym, right? So the process involves determining the data that you want, right, for export. Maybe making some changes to it, right? If you're moving it somewhere else, maybe it needs to be reformatted. And then you're exporting it for the purpose of import, so then you'll be loading it up. So that's what ETL stands for. So we have options for using the GUI to do exports of databases and imports. There's a variety of command line options for doing bulk options, such as bulk copies and bulk inserts. There's this weird concept. So there's a few parts in here that are very programmery. How's that for a word? There's one where you're building up this SQL integration service project that will let you link from a data source that lives somewhere else that's not in SQL, like a flat text file, for example, that has just rows of data. There's that demo. I've already built it, so you don't have to watch me do all the graphics and whatnot, but I'll show you what's there. And then there's a thing at the end, which is about building data tier applications. Right? The best part about that module is we got DAX, and we got BACS, and we got backpacks, right? So lots of fun acronyms. That one's also very programming, so it's good to know. The portions that, from a security perspective, that you'll be most interested in will be the exporting and importing and the backups, because you're trying to keep the data safe. I'm not going to do the front-end constraint demos because that's another one of those Azure ones, and I have zero confidence that I can actually interact with Microsoft at the same time as streaming. I sent you that link in an email that tells you what constraints are about. And then you guys have a lovely lab at the end. So let me go to the next slide. As I said, transferring data to and from SQL Server. Importing and exporting. So maybe you don't want to back up an entire database. Maybe you just need one table inside of a database that you want to export it, move it over to another server. So that's what's happening there. Our bulk operations, and then deploying data tier applications. And again, that chunk is very programming, but the idea is you have an application that's running, and that application needs a chunk of your SQL data, and it may not need to connect to your entire SQL database, and it may need a set of configurations that allow it to access. And then the guy that built the application decides to go with version 2.0, and version 2.0 has a completely different set of requirements, and this application that you have may be deployed across many systems in your business, and you want a quick and dirty way to tell version 2.0, here's the connections that you need to get back to the SQL data. So that's what the DAC and the DAC pack and all that stuff can do. So it's very programming. So we'll have a quick overview of the concepts of data transfer, the tools that are available. Since you are moving data around, and your chances are you're doing this on a live server, you want to be able to do this as quick as possible without impacting performance of the server, so that all the people working on it don't grind to a halt. So there's things you can do to speed up this process of import, export, and moving. Indexes, right? The proper word is indices, but whatever. An index is a table of information that helps you quickly scan through a larger database. I think on day one, I mentioned it when I was drawing on the whiteboard, the good old days, eh? And I said that you may have a database full of records, and those records may contain entries, multiple entries for the same person. So therefore, you may have keys that you use, like an employee ID number or a person's name. So those keys would uniquely identify, all 14 records that actually belong to that one person. And then an index would be a thing that would allow you to quickly scan through that database and find all those. So suffice it to say, indices speed up your ability and SQL's ability to find stuff, but it slows down SQL's ability to copy and back up stuff, because as you're moving things around, it'll also be scrambling around trying to build up these index tables. So you can disable those, make things fast, have them built over again. Constraints. So a constraint are rules that you set up on what data should look like when it goes into fields inside your table. So that's another stop. Data's coming in. What's the rules? Should I change it? You turn those things off, your whole bulk activity will go faster. Partition switching. So there's another option for how you want memory to behave. Again, another speed bump. If you're trying to move things around as fast as possible, if you're stopping and worrying about how it's going to be configured in memory, that'll slow you down. And then partition switching, that one also relates to the Azure environment. So I will not be doing that demo either. But I got plenty of other demos that'll be popping up to entertain you with. So the concept of moving data around can be boiled down to 3 phases or 3 zones, right? Summarized with the acronym ETL. The stuff you have to do when you're extracting the data, right? So you're pulling the data from a data source, from a database, from a table. Once you've got it, do I want to change it in any way? That's what the transform is all about. Since I'm pulling this out of the table and I'm maybe moving this to another server, maybe that other server has a different set of keywords that it uses for all these data points. So I'm going to transform it so when it drops on the other SQL server, it fits in with everybody's naming convention. And then the final thing, loading it into the target platform. So that's ETL. And again, extracting it, you probably, if you're on a live production system and you want to pull data out, right, it's a good idea to pull things out a chunk at a time. You also don't want to have something that is constantly rereading the same data again, so you have to coordinate it. And if you want to make sure that the data is consistent, you don't want to replicate the same thing again and again in the target where you're outputting it to, because if you go and import it somewhere else, you might create duplicates. Transforming, again, I mentioned changing the data and then loading the data. I've got my export. Now I'm going to import it somewhere. You'd be doing this for copying, moving data between servers. You're running a query. The query is pulling in a bunch of data from your databases. You want to store that in a file to be used elsewhere. You want to pull data from a file, right? Or sorry, pull data from a file into a table. There's a demo that I do later on where we are grabbing something from a flat file and suddenly making it into a table in the database. And if you suddenly have the decision that you're going to change how things are named, so maybe you have a product database and you've renamed some of your products, then you could use this extract, transform, and load to manipulate all the data. So now that all these items have the new version of the product name instead of the old one. What tools do we have? So we can use the SQL Server Integration Services, SSIS. There's a wizard for import and export. Bulk copy, command line stuff, bulk insert, open row set. So a bunch of command line things that do different functions, right? Copy will do the whole thing. Insert pulls stuff up. Open row set gives you some flexibility to manipulate the data while you're doing it and do some specific targeting, and also pull data in from data sources that aren't inside of SQL. For example, a flat file or maybe an Access database inside of Microsoft Office. To make your data transfer more efficient, here's some of the things that you can do to get rid of speed bumps. So if there are constraints, and those constraints are rules that say when data is coming into this field, make sure it meets all these criteria and like reformat it and stuff, turn those off. Get rid of any of your indexes or indices. You can build those later. And also if you have some of your auditing tools turned on and they're watching for changes and they'll trigger, you will probably want to shut off the auditing and the triggers so that extra code isn't running as you're moving stuff around. And again, you can turn these things all back on later on once you've finished your import. Locking. is the process. So the other day when we're trying to figure out why this one SQL command we ran couldn't change a file, we went and looked at and we found that, oh, this other SQL command, the blocked, is blocked because the blocker SQL that was running has something open. There's a variety of locks. So you may want to consider disabling locks in some scenarios, or you may in fact want to consider locking down entire tables only for your purpose. And when you do your export, nobody else can be manipulating the data, so you're not competing with others. And also any of the logging you might have turned on. If you want to minimize logging, if you want to transfer logs, there's certain recovery models that the database has to be in. So again, the simple log doesn't have transaction logs, so that'll be fast, right? Bulk logged has all the transaction logs stored elsewhere. Also with the import and export, it may not just be the data files that you're moving around, but also the transaction logs from machine to machine. So you minimize the logging so that your process of extracting, transforming, and then loading is faster. If the index is turned on, off, disabled, then users can't use the index. If you have a bunch of machines clustered together that are sharing an index for multiple machines, that's going to prevent access. You're disabling it, you're not deleting it, right, or dropping it. So therefore, the definition is still inside the metadata. It's still inside your database, which means that you can turn it back on and have it run and be recreated. And that's what we just did in the second point. So you've moved it over, you've got it in the new target, you re-enable the index, now it's going to rebuild it. Depending upon the size of your database, that could take quite a while to rebuild. And automating this process of doing a bulk backup, transform, move, and turn it back on, right? You could create some SQL commands. You could even use PowerShell, for example, to return on indexes for all these databases, right? And then they'll be recreated. Right. Disabling and then re-enabling is an option instead of deleting them all and then having to recreate them all at the other side for bulk imports. Another convenience for speeding things up right around the database is to have keys. So you have a table, the table has a bunch of rows of data in it. You may decide that the primary key for this table is something like the employee ID number that's there. And that key, right, is what will identify all the records, right, that are in that one database table that might belong to the same employee. The fact that you've defined a key means that whenever data is coming and going from the table, SQL is checking to see, oh, does this key match? Yep. Oh, there's another one for Bob. If you disable the primary key at the time of export and then re-enable it after you import it, right, you've also shut down a chunk of code that might be slowing down your process. So you disable the index. All the indexes will be rebuilt when you re-enable it. If you have constraints on the data and the constraint says the data has to look like this, and you move it to the new server and it gets rebuilt, and that rebuilding process doesn't match the constraints, there can be failures. And there are other keys you can pull in, foreign keys from other data sources that are part of the search process. If you disable that, then any of the other dependencies that are outside of that database are disabled, so it should speed things up. And if there are foreign keys, you can disable foreign key, disable the check, right? Again, the constraints are rules that are controlling how the data should look in the field, so you can shut that off. And you can vary the behavior of the constraint with check, right? So you turn it back on and it'll be rebuilt. If you don't check it first, then the foreign key will no longer be trusted, which means you may have broken a link between your database and some outside source. So it's convenient to shut these things off to speed things up, but there are possible errors that will happen and other challenges afterwards. So as I said, I'm not doing this demo because it's in the Azure part. So also related to part of the background of the engine that's there to try to help with the overall operation of data, especially in tables inside of your database that are partitioned, right? The ability to do some partition switching will allow you to. This is similar, when I looked at this, to moving a file in NTFS. So recall, if you have a file on the same partition of your hard drive, so it's in C:, if you, this is like old, A+, Net+ stuff. If you move the file from, say, folder X to folder Y, and that file is actually on the same drive, the same partition, C:, you're not actually moving anything. All you're doing is changing a pointer in the file allocation table in NTFS, for example. So this is similar in nature here. If the data that is being bulk loaded to another spot exists in the same file group, has a matching schema, right? The target partition that it's going to is empty, right? When you actually export it and move it to another location, you are simply changing a pointer, which means that the process is a lot faster than actually copying it from one spot to another. If the table doesn't use partitioning, right, not required, and partition switching, right, on unpartitioned tables works on any edition of SQL Server. So it's not a concept that is only available if you've gone and paid for the enterprise level. So the idea here is that this is allowing you to quickly move data around, because you don't have to export to a completely different server, right? You could be exporting a table from the AdventureWorks database on MIA SQL to the HR database on the MIA SQL server. That database is a real file somewhere, but because those two databases live on the exact same box and potentially live on the exact same drive, you can do this partition switching, which means that you actually didn't have a network copy going on. You just changed some pointers. So that's one of the possible advantages that can speed things up. Again, this was a cloud demo. All right, so table data. So we're going to pick one particular table, right, like a products table or something inside our database, right, and manipulate that, do some ETL on it. There could be linked servers. So again, the idea of a linked server we'll talk about later, but it's basically you have your SQL Server environment, you have your databases and tables that live inside your SQL Server, but you have other data that's somewhere else that is probably not even in a SQL box. It's remote, and maybe it's in a text file, or maybe it's in a Microsoft Access database. So you can import and export across those two separate platforms. Part of the framework that helps with this is the SSIS, and I got a demo for that. We've also got the SQL Server import and export wizard, and I've got a demo for doing that. So you have MIA SQL, and you have some data that lives on a completely different box, but your MIA SQL database can represent that data inside of a table that looks like it lives inside your SQL Server box, right? That is a linked server, which means that even though it is a text file that's somewhere else, you can go in and start creating your own SQL queries that'll go through and scan the data, right? How can you associate or manage linked servers? Again, from the GUI, the SSMS, or you can use it, using transact SQL commands, right? So type out the code yourself. You need to have the data source that it's pulling from and a security context for the connection. So imagine that it's a text file that lives on a folder on a different server. when your server reaches out to access that, the server better have security principal permissions to say, yes, I recognize you. Yes, you can open this folder. Yes, you can access the data. Recall from modules ago that your principals could be people, right? Your principals accessing data could be applications. Your principals could be services. If they're pulling a file from somewhere else, they still have to authenticate and be checked to see if they meet all the NTFS access permissions and all the share permissions. So that needs to be configured. If you're writing some code and your SQL code is reaching out to pull some data from another server that's somewhere else that it has access to, when you create the SQL code to access it, you're going to want to, well, you're stuck using a long-winded name, 4 parts. The first part basically says the name of the box it's on, right? So server 47, or in the textbook example, he has a box called manufacturing, right? That's the name of the machine. The actual database that it wants to reach, right? So for example, database is, MF1, right? The associated schema, and then the actual name of the table that you're trying to access to. So since you are reaching out from MIA SQL box to something else, you have to give a full part, fully defined name so that your target source that you're getting, right, is identifiable and reachable. There's a few other SQL commands, right, that you can use. So we've got open query and open query select and open query update. So again, I think I'll jump over to the textbook in a second to show this. But if you are reaching out to another source, you will be using this, 4-part name as required to identify the target. So I'm going to switch my share, new share, trainer handbook. So here's an example. You're running this select command on MIA SQL, and on another machine called the manufacturing server, it has a database. Guy misspelled production. Pretty sure there should be a C in there, right? .job. So he's basically reaching out and accessing the job table on that server inside that database, right? You could have a schema that's called production, but I doubt it. So this is an example of 4-part naming. And another example here, SQL. So it's going to try to reach out to this completely separate box called manufacturing. And in this scenario, it's saying, I'm going to open up a query, but I'm targeting the query to this box called manufacturing. And when it gets there, I want you to do the following, right? Pick the top 10 based on manufacture date from this following table that lives on it. So there's your options for reaching out and pulling data from linked servers. Okay, so I've got data that I want to extract. I maybe have some transformations I want to do, right? Might want to load it somewhere else. The data source might exist elsewhere in a flat file. It's not on my actual server. Are there tools that exist that can help me sort of make that connection from my SQL server to where the data is and define how I want it to be pulled? And when it's pulled from that flat table, automatically create a database, right, or a table in a database from that source. And what SQL provides you, right, is the tool set that's inside their integration services. And you'll see the GUI in a bit. I'm not going to walk through how I built it. I'll just show you the chunks. Very programmy. You will go through and configure a part that determines how the data is going to move. And that's the control flow engine. And you're effectively saying, I'm connecting X to Y, and here's the resources. Then you define the data flow. Here's my 2 resources. Here's what I want to pull out. and here's where I'm mapping it to. I'm taking column 1 from this table, and I want to go into from this flat file, this text file somewhere, and I want it to show up inside a table in my database, and I want to call it X. So it does that data flow. It works by creating projects, and once you have the project in place and you've linked your control flow to your data flow, you know where you're connecting and what you want to pull and how you want to do it and where it's going to go. You effectively run the project, right? And the project will create the database transactions. You can run this from the project studio, but you can also create packages that can be deployed. And you can, again, do it from the GUI, or you can have it triggered by various other executables, right? There's a few of them here. DTEXE, right? And this other one as well. So you can do it a couple of ways. So let me find my studio. Let me find my VM. To make that bigger. Move people's faces out of the way. And I got the Visual Studio over here. All right, new share, SQL machine. All right, can you see my SQL machine with the boxes and arrows and stuff going on here?
Yep.
Yeah, so again, very programmery, and it's really programmery because we're actually using Microsoft Visual Studio. So it's actually is a programmer's software building environment. The demonstration had created a project for us already. So I already loaded up that project, and this is all the stuff over here. It's got some package definitions, etc. So when I first started, I had none of this middle part. I just had components over here. So I actually dragged over the package, and it gave me this work area. While I was working on the work area, there's this toolbox over here, and this toolbox has a variety of widgets or components you might want to use. And I effectively did a drag and drop, and I created a data flow and a control flow that allowed me to specify the targets. So I was over here, and so there's the data flow. I actually dragged this over here. This package, I dropped it here. I renamed it and made my control flow. Then while I was working on it, I needed to make a data flow, so I dragged that over here. So what's happening at this level, I click on it. It's got this file source, which is a flat file, and it exists in one of the folders on the D drive in the demo somewhere. And this flat file basically had 2 columns in it. So I pointed to it, right? After I did that, I told it that, in fact, I wanted the 2 columns to be pushed into the sales app 1 database on our MAA SQL server. And I want it to be created in a table called top level domain. So it actually lets you pick and choose where you want to target things. And that's where I put it. A few other options here. So table lock, remember it mentioned turning on table lock to speed up the process because you'd lock it, nobody else can mess with it. Left check constraints on, could have turned that off, which means it would have sped up the process. And then there was this mapping process I went to. So this flat file just had 2 columns in it. And the table I was going to had 2 fields that had names to it. So I basically said, take whatever's in column 0 and put it in a thing called domain in that table I created. Take what's in column 1 and put it in an entry called file version. So once I had defined what the source was, right, told it how to push the data into where I wanted it to go, it was sufficient to potentially do the job. So I basically went into debug mode. So debugging is a programming thing, which means run this code I built up, this application, and while you're doing it, show me what's going on down below. So in case I have any errors, I can actually fix it. So running it in debug would execute all points, and if there's any errors, would pop up, right, and tell me something went sideways. Okay, and after I ran it, I pulled in the SQL that they'd made for us before that basically would go through, connect to the Sales App One database, and would say, hey, go and look to see if there's a table called top level domain that was created and show me the data that's in there. So this is a table that lives. Table, show me. Graph table, system tables, top level domain. You lost it. Sales tables. I'll find it. I gotta do a refresh. Yeah, it's in there. You're being slow. But from this link, it pulled in this data. And if I can remember where the data actually is, I can show you the flat file to map to. Yeah, top level domain.txt module 15 data. So that was the external file. So it's just a text file, right, with all these entries, 2 columns, AA, blah, blah, AARP. So if you go back and look at what was pulled up here, AA, AARP. And that was done by building up this package exportation SSIS control flow, data flow diagram. So again, this is very, very programmy. You will not be building into these, well, unless you move down this path in your career. But once this is put in place, this project could be saved. And in the future, if the data source changes, so Sales App no longer pulls data into the actual table inside of the Sales App database from this thing, it's now being pulled from somewhere else. You can go in here and modify the details and pick and choose where it's going from. So we could like pick a new data source if we wanted and browse and find a different file and maybe pull this one in instead. So that's how you can automate the process. Slide your pictures back over to where you're supposed to go. Right. So that's what I just did with the overall management studio. So with the import and export wizard part, again, we can create those. You can do transformations. So remember, E was for extract, grab the data, T, transform, do any manipulations, so you can map things over. So right, I'm already saying, hang on, I'm just checking my steps here. I'm already connected, right. I'll be switching screens in a second. Studio here anymore. Already connected to the proper database. Share. Go back to the SQL. Okay, so we're going to do something else to the sales app database again. In this case, we're doing just an export. So right-clicked, went on tasks. We're going to tell it to do an export data. Saying, okay, great, here's Mr. Wizard. What is your data source going to be? So I have a few options here. We're going to tell it to use, let's see, flat source file. So we're going to, oh, wait a minute. Action string, did I click the right one? No. Don't need to change this yet. Hang on. So many options, such little time. Export data. Here we go. We go next. Data source. Right, SQL Server native client. Okay, so that's right. I just wasn't reading it properly. Scroll down. Here it is. So native client. What server do you want to mess with? So we're going to do our local one here. The database we want to modify, right? Or sorry, export data from. It knows it's a sales app database, sales app 1, so we're good. Okay, so now we're choosing a destination. So this is the point where we're pushing it out to a flat file. So we're pulling it out of database in SQL, and we're going to push it into some text file somewhere. And what are we going to call it? I'm going to browse. I'm going to go D. I'm going to go demo files. I'm going to go module 15. Okay, so I did it before. Do it again. We're going to call it export to text. We're going to have some options to change things. Oh yeah, so we're going to see, there should be a skip here. Format text qualifier. Left of destinations, going there, leaving that same. Format delimited, text qualifier none. Column names and first data header row. Okay, sure. We could have modified settings there, but we'll leave it as it is. And we're going to actually move it as opposed to create the query that might do it. All right, we're going to pick our source table. So we're looking here to see what we've got. And we've got production products, production categories. Okay, I guess we're going to take that one. And we can specify things such as how do we separate the data in this text file? So we're going to use commas. How we're going to know that we finished one row and go to the next one. So this actually means carriage return line feed. So it's basically putting like a press enter at the end of each of the tables. And we could have it do it right away, or we can say save this and we'll run it later as a package. Okay, it ran. We go back up to our folder. There's our export to we just made. And so that table had category ID, category name, and description in its table. And there's each of the rows, right? Beverages, soft drinks. So we just exported a copy from the table and we put it in a flat text file. Right, new share. We go back to PowerPoint. Okay, so we're going to leave the land of using the GUI and enter the land of doing command line type activities. using utilities such as BCP for bulk copy, bulk insert, statement as part of SQL, and then the open row set function that we can integrate with a import access export process to modify the data. So jump into the command line and you can throw down a BCP. So this works from command.exe. It'll work in PowerShell as well. So for example, we could bulk copy currency information from the AdventureWorks database from the sales sub portion, right? And put it in a file called currency.csv on the D drive, and various command line options that will tell it how to perform, whether we pause this, whether we'll do it right away. You can also use format files to determine how the data should look when it gets copied. And the format files are defined as an XML file. Right. So you can create a format file, and then once you've actually made it, you can use it as part of the exportation process for bulk copy. I'm going to do a bulk copy. I'll switch over in a second, so I don't need this big GUI anymore. See if I can reduce it. Great. See, actually that fires up. Awesome. All right, new share. SQL machine, where you are. Okay, so I'm on our MIA SQL box, and I just threw down a command.exe from here to get to the command prompt. And want to see what the parameters are. Excuse me, the BCP. So threw down a BCP space minus question mark. It tells you some of the options. So I will attempt to use my cut and paste to see how it behaves, especially with a line return. May not be too happy with me. Oh, great, Scott. One more time. Copy. Paste. Yeah, so didn't like the line return, so I got away with half of it. So I got the first part of this, and d:/demo files /mod 15 /bcp /employees format text. All right, so I'm going to copy this. All right, so I didn't copy the two lines in the text this time, so didn't try to execute. Of course, because I can't see because I went over a line. Yeah, so close. Dot files, mod 15, BC, employees. What did I create over here? Employees format text. Okay, let's go see what actually made this. Oops, not you. Next, we're going to demo files, mod 15, BCP, blah, blah. Demo files, mod 15. Okay. Employees format.text. Format null, MySQL, MA, T-bang bang. Pipe, blah, blah. The demo files, mod 15. It doesn't like the space. try to save time and bite you in the foot. Anybody see my typo? 15. I made that. Let's see what it looks like. Demo files. Mod 15. BCP. What's it look like?
After the dash F, should there be a space and then decolon?
Well, I tried that first and didn't like it. So I took it away. It also didn't like it. So there's our employees format file. Okay. That's what it's named. It's got the content in it. So that all looks good. So I'll retrieve the next command. So tell you what, I'm going to just type it. Maybe I got a hidden character in there or something. Slash demo file slash 15. Oh, I got a D in there. Come on, guys, help me out. D. I got an extra. I had a P on the end. It's BCP, not BCPD. Employees format text.
I didn't even see it until you said it.
Yeah, no, obviously I didn't either. So, and you're not my mama. You don't have to help me find these things. I was more or less giving myself heck, not you guys. All right, so we got that. Okay, and then once we got that in place, we made it right. We can actually make use of it and do the export. Oh, yeah, wait a second, Rob. Don't copy both lines because that will not work. Copy. Control V. You can do it. Control V. And I know what everybody's thinking, probably what I'm thinking. Might have just been faster if I typed this out. Meow? I don't think so. Demo files. Slash mod 15 slash BCP slash employees format XML. I'm having typing challenges today. Oh, demo files, mod 15, play CSV. It's my SQL to blah, blah, blah. And the file is demo files, mod 15, BC employees format .xml. Mod 15, where now? Oh, that's top level domain. Maybe I had it still opened. So I put, so that's where it's supposed to go. That's our server, DF for file. The target is D demo files, mod 15, BCP employee for my .xml. So let's go back there and look again. Okay, we got our CSV. And man, let's see how that looks like inside Notepad, shall we? Fine, do it. Yeah, so we created the output file, but we weren't able to pull that in. So we don't have the XML, so something went sideways here. So let's check our previous commands. We don't have the XML file there. Text format, man. Okay, because I failed to create the XML file that helps us run this. So once more with feeling. Copy that. Geez, I wonder if I'm brave enough to do this. Ooh, that worked. Okay, and the one that did the long-winded CSVs, blah, blah, XML, BC. Bam. Wow, magic. Okay, and now if we go back over here and look at demo and our demo files and module 15 and BCP. And oh, there's 3 kilobytes. All right, so it worked. So the cautionary tale is, yeah, there's a frig load of typing in here, and there's a lot of opportunity for typos, including cut and paste and cloning mistakes. So that's a bulk copy, the painful way. New share, back to PowerPoint. Move you guys out of the way. So leaving command line and going into some SQLese, we can use bulk insert. Again, it's running inside the database engine process. So it basically means you are running it inside of SQL Server, and you can create user-defined transactions, which means that you can type one-offs inside the Management Studio GUI, or you could also create your own functions that can be called. So the example here, we're going to pull some data from a flat file, so new orders.txt, and we're going to bulk insert it into the AdventureWorks database sales table or order detail table. And it's telling us, by the way, fields are separated by a bar character, and /n is the new line character. So you don't typically see that when you open up like a notepad file, but all these lines in this other text file we saw, they're on brand new lines because there is a hidden new line character, which is indicated by the \n. So this is telling you how to do a bulk insert, another source. Now, the good news about this demo is that the SQL is pre-built for us, which means we don't have to worry about me typing. Get this out of the way, get that out of the way. Your face is very spooky, Casper the Friendly Eric.
Oh, do you like it?
Yeah, it's very nice.
Check this out. Oh, my face is back.
That is just too weird. And now it's forever immortalized in the video of this demonstration.
They'll teach the cyber students whenever they're watching these that this is how you hide your face.
Exactly, yeah. Prevent identity theft, to change your background.
That's right.
Demo 6, bulk, insert. Okay, so here's this one. We're going to execute the code here. So we're going to use finance. Oh, if I ran this before, the table won't be empty. Yay, I guess I didn't run it before, or I did a reset like a good instructor would do. Now we're going to pull a whole bunch of data from this text file over here, which we hope exists. 105 rows affected. So that's should be an indication that there was 105 rows of data inside said flat file. And we run the go, and wham. So here's all the stuff, 105 rows. If we're to go to said text file, right, it will have that content in there. And I'll resist the temptation to do that. New share. Back to PowerPoint. Move this over. And another option, right? Open row set. Use it inside of our own SQL programming, and you can go and pull rows from any OLEDB provider. right? What does that mean? So OLE is a protocol, right, and an agreed upon method that if a particular data source can handle these OLE requests, then in a organized fashion, other entities can reach out and request to access this data. So if you just create your own text file and have it sitting there, right, you can configure that. If you have something like Microsoft Office and you have Access and you create an Access database, it will provide an OLE capability. And you can create your own queries as you want them, ad hoc. Wherever the data is coming from must be set up to allow connection and random access, ad hoc access. And you can import a file as one of my favorite words, binary large object, right? A blob. Again, blobs are a Azure concept as well, so this integrates with that potentially. And you can pull this stuff all in as a single row. Switch over a second. Set SQL, move people's pictures. New share. My machine. All right, so here's a chunk of SQL code, many different pieces that will use the open row set command. So we're going to, again, take a peek at the sales tax rate table. Okay, it is empty. That's nothing. So we're going to select a bunch of data from this flat file called sales tax rate text. Okay, and we've got an XML that helps us identify what the text looks like and helps with the translation of the data. So open row set, we're going to select the information. So what do we have? We've got tax rate IDs, state and province IDs, Canadian GST, etc. Right. So this is selecting the data from that flat file. Maybe we don't want it all. So we want to look at that flat file and just say things that have see things that have a sales tax rate ID of 29. Oh, the good old Germany output tax. All right, didn't see that coming. And if we want to go through and do a select, apply some of the formatting information, and then slap the data into the actual sales tax rate table inside of our database. So enough connecting, enough looking. Let's actually go through and commit the data. 29 rows affected. So something happened. Did we actually get anything inside that sales tax rate? And there we have it. So pulled it from the flat file, right? And that's the open row set, right? Took it directly and targeted into a table. New share. Oh yeah, the other programming part. So we're almost done. So we're going to talk about data tier applications, how to deploy them. Again, there's a tool for creating them. Once you've got the data tier application deployment package and applications are using it, you can go and do an upgrade or an update. And then in order to bundle up the database chunks you want for these applications, there's an extraction process. And then there's a demo at the end where I'll show you how to do it. Yeah, so all these acronyms. So the data tier application, right, that you're creating is known as a DAC. And you generate one, you pick and choose the items, or the wizard does, that you want. And it'll be a container that points to the objects that are needed, right, inside the user's database or databases. And if you want to deploy that, once you've got it, You can deploy it into a package, and that package is known as a DAC pack. Why not? Who makes the DACs? So this is very programming specific. So quite often the application developers will say, okay, I've got my program going. I don't need the whole freaking database. I need this table. That's all I need. Let me create this DAC and the DAC pack. And now I can just basically have this associated with my application, and it can link into the proper databases. Or it basically says, hey, database administrator, DBA, I need the following. Could you create something for me that has all these resources, provide it to me, and then we can roll it out and deploy. When you create these different deployment packages, your DACs, they get registered inside the metadata of your server. What? All the accounting data that keeps track of things will know about it. And every time you make version 1, version 2, version 3, it'll keep record of that. It'll know what the particular contents of each of those are. This is handy because, say the application designer creates version 2.0 of his program and asks for a new DAC. So you create the next one, the next version. You deploy that and nothing works. And we say, okay, forget that. Roll back to version previous to this. Go back to DAC 1, and he's not going to deploy this application. He's going to go back to his old version. So this history allows you to keep track of all the different flavors as they're created. And if you suddenly need, besides just the data and the access, you also want the schema. Remember, the schema contains a lot of the object definitions. You can make one of those, and obviously they named it this because they're geeks, and you've just created a backpack. Options are using the GUI, the Management Studio, to deploy them and firing up the application wizard. SQL package, right, from the command line. PowerShell can do it. And also, if you're in a Microsoft Azure environment, you can use, have a DAC pack that you have, right, and deploy it inside of your Azure database. And I already mentioned this, you make version 1 of the DAC, you make version 2, so you can use this and roll it out as an in-place upgrade to all the applications that need the new definition. There is a possibility that you create a DAC and version 1 was missing some stuff, so you create version 2, and version 2 gets deployed and it fills in the missing components. So part of the redeployment might not be because of a new program that needs it, maybe fixes and updates and corrections. Any of the differences are identified and tagged. That helps with the versioning information, and a script is generated, right? They'll help you with the deployment and the schema definition. How do you upgrade? You can have the GUI push it out for you, and you can use the command line SQL package, or you can use PowerShell. And the nature of how the upgrade conducts itself, right? You can control with a variety of settings from each of those possible methods of deployment. So they call this extracting data tier applications because you are looking at the database, and inside the database, you're picking and choosing the chunks that you need. So maybe this application only cares about product inventory. So you are using the wizard to pick what you want and create a DAC that is specific to that content. Right, the source will probably have objects, right, only that are supported to the DAC. So you make the DAC, and the DAC pack, which is short for DAC package, is what you can use to deploy it. There'll be no user information inside of it. You are specifying connections to data resources, not user tables. And way to export it, again, same tools. GUI, SQL package exe, PowerShell. Let's see how this one goes. All right, let me close down some stuff that I don't need before I switch over. So that's extra, that's extra, that's extra. I don't want that. Finance tasks, export. Okay. All right. Let me switch my shares. All right. So we're going to try to generate one of these for the finance database. So right click under our tasks. We got to make sure we pick the right one of the data tiers, right? So we're doing an extraction. Mr. Wizard fires up. So it's basically telling us, oh, we're doing a few things. We're going to set some properties. We're going to review, make sure we've got what we want, right? Things are going to be valid. And then we're actually going to build the package, right? We're going to generate the DAC pack for deployment. All right. So finance version, cool. Leave it at that. We could give a description. Now we need to tell it where we want it to go. It's assuming we want to drop this thing inside of our local documents, but we're not doing that in this demo. We are putting it inside of one of the demo folders. Module 15, it's in DAC pack. Yeah, so I made one of these before. I gotta mess with myself. I'll call it 2. Oh, okay. If I picked that one, I could have ticked the old overwrite existing file. Tell you what, because I just figured that's probably gonna bite me in the butt somewhere because I'm gonna be typing challenged again. So there's that there. Validation and summary page. Let me just double check here. Click next. All right. So validation and summary. We're making this version description, saving it here. So not a lot of details. Okay, so build package page, right? Built it for us, right? We can say finish. Go over here, the demo files, module 15, backpack, there it is. So I viewed it, open with, no, let's escape that. Okay, then we're going to run it. So we're going to go back and we're going to go through a deployment process. All right, and we're going to deploy a DAC. So deploy data tier application. All right, so Mr. Wizard again, find some stuff, we got to select some stuff, gotta let it run. Demo file, module 15, back. It's the one. Okay, so this one. We had a little warning message there because it's basically telling us, hey, we've already got one of those. So we renamed it to Finance DAC. Okay, so we're going to pull this thing in and we're going to call it, we're going to have deployed from Finance DAC pack. There's our summary. All right, and then here at the very end, it's recording its versioning information inside of the metadata, so that if we come back and build version 2.0 of this, it's got a record of it. So we do the finish. Let's do a refresh. Okay, so we didn't have one of these before. We now do. So we created and deployed it, and we use that to generate this entity, this database. Go to our tables, see what we got. DBO currency. Oh, I showed you guys this maneuver before. If you wanted to quickly look at a table to see what's in it, you can right click and say select top 1,000 rows. And it's going through. All right, well, we got it. We just don't have any content in it. So the table was created, we have no data. So we deployed it, it exists, and it's there potentially for future use. New share. Meanwhile, back at the PowerPoint. Slide this over. All right, so as expected, this module is done. So you have your lab, so please jump into those, and I will maybe go grab a coffee, but I will hang around to assist as required. More.